Hey everyone, tonight we're exploring something extraordinary. A single decision, one moment of refusal that could have reshaped the entire 20th century. So before we dive in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these deep explorations of history. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to connect with viewers from around the world. Now, settle in, dim the lights if you can, maybe grab a warm drink. Because tonight's journey takes us back to 1917, to a crossroads that defined our modern world. The question we're asking isn't simple. It's not about replacing one president with another or moving a few troops from one battlefield to the next. No, tonight we're asking what would have happened if the United States, standing at the precipice of global war, had simply said no. What if America had refused to join the Allies in World War I? What if neutrality hadn't been a brief pause but a permanent policy? The answer reshapes everything we know. The map of Europe, the rise of ideologies, the very concept of the American century. All of it hinges on that decision made in the spring of 1917. To understand what might have been, we need to understand what was. By early 1917, the Great War had been raging for nearly 3 years. What began in August 1914 as a regional conflict between Austria, Hungary and Serbia had metastasized into something monstrous. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria were locked in a death struggle against the Allies, France, Britain, Russia, Italy and a constellation of smaller nations. The Western Front had become a scar across Europe. From the English Channel to the Swiss border, armies faced each other across no man's land, that terrible stretch of cratered earth between opposing trenches. Millions of men had already died. The Battle of Verdun in 1916 alone claimed over 300,000 lives. The Somme offensive, launched that same year, saw 60,000 British casualties on the first day. Entire generations were being fed into the machinery of industrial warfare. By 1917, exhaustion permeated every combatant nation. France had seen much of its northeastern industrial heartland occupied or destroyed. Its army had mutinied after the disastrous Nivelle offensive, with soldiers refusing to attack but willing to defend. Britain, while not fighting on its own soil, had mobilised its entire society for war. Rationing, conscription and industrial conversion had transformed the nation. And Russia, that vast empire, was crumbling from within. Food shortages, military defeats, and political unrest would explode in revolution in March 1917, eventually removing Russia from the war entirely. Germany and Austria-Hungary, for all their military successes, were also suffering. The British naval blockade had turned Germany into a nation of the starving. Civilians subsisted on bread made from sawdust and potatoes. The winter of 1916 to 1917 became known as the turnip winter, because that root vegetable was often the only food available. Austria-Hungary, that patchwork empire of ethnicities, was being held together by little more than Habsburg inertia and German support. The Ottoman Empire was fighting on multiple fronts in the Middle East, Caucasus and Arabia. Its armies stretched impossibly thin. Into this cauldron of blood and exhaustion stood the United States, watching from across the Atlantic. America in 1917 was a nation transformed from what it had been just a few decades earlier. The frontier had closed, industry had exploded, Millions of immigrants had arrived from Europe, bringing with them the languages, cultures, and grudges of the Old World. The United States had wealth, resources, and a population of 100 million. But it also had something else. A deep-seated belief that European conflicts were not American problems. This philosophy had roots stretching back to George Washington's farewell address in 1796, when he warned against permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823 had formalized this into policy, essentially declaring that Europe should stay out of the Americas and America would stay out of Europe. For nearly a century this had worked. The United States had fought Mexico, Spain, and itself in the Civil War, but it had avoided entanglement in Europe's endless dynastic squabbles. President Woodrow Wilson embodied this tradition. When war broke out in 1914, he immediately declared American neutrality. The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls, he proclaimed. We must be impartial in thought as well as in action. It was a noble sentiment, one that resonated with most Americans. Why should American boys die in a European war? What did the assassination of an Austrian archduke in Sarajevo have to do with farmers in Iowa or factory workers in Pennsylvania? But neutrality proved harder to maintain than to declare. American banks, particularly JP Morgan and Company, extended enormous loans to the Allies, especially Britain and France. By 1917, American financial institutions had loaned over $7 billion to the Allied powers. American factories produced munitions, weapons, and supplies that flowed across the Atlantic in British and American merchant ships. While this trade was technically legal under international law for neutral nations, it created a financial and economic interest in an Allied victory. If Germany won, those loans would never be repaid. Germany understood this dynamic perfectly. Unable to break the British naval block through surface action, Germany turned to submarine warfare. The U-boat, or Unterseeboot, became Germany's weapon of choice. These submarines could sink merchant ships carrying supplies to Britain, potentially starving the island nation into submission. But submarine warfare had a problem. Under traditional rules of naval warfare, a warship was supposed to stop a merchant vessel, search it, and allow the crew to evacuate before sinking it. Submarines, vulnerable on the surface, couldn't follow these rules. They attacked without warning, torpedoing ships and sending them to the bottom with their crews still aboard. This led to the sinking of the RMS Lusitania on May 7, 1915. The British ocean liner was struck by a German torpedo off the coast of Ireland and sank in 18 minutes, killing 198 people, including 128 Americans. The American public was outraged. Newspapers printed stories of women and children drowning. Editorial cartoons depicted Germany as a murderous Hun. President Wilson sent a series of increasingly stern notes to Germany, demanding an end to unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany, not yet ready to bring America into the war, backed down. In 1916, after the sinking of the French passenger ship Sussex, Germany issued the Sussex Pledge, promising not to sink passenger or merchant ships without warning and without saving lives. For a time, the U-boats were reined in, and tension between the United States and Germany eased. But by early 1917, Germany faced a strategic crisis. The British blockade was slowly starving the nation. The French, despite their mutinies, still held their lines. Russia was weakening but not yet out of the war, and most ominously, there were rumours that the United States might eventually enter the conflict. German military planners, particularly General Erich Ludendorff, believed they had one chance for victory: unrestricted submarine warfare. If U-boats could sink enough ships fast enough, Britain could be starved into submission before America could mobilise and deploy an army to Europe. It was a gamble, but Germany was running out of options. On January 31st, 1917, Germany announced the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. Any ship, neutral or belligerent, found in waters around Britain would be sunk without warning. It was a calculated risk. Germany's leaders knew this policy would likely bring America into the war, but they believed they could win before American forces could make a difference. After all, the United States had a tiny army of about 100,000 men, smaller than Romania's. It would take months, maybe years, to raise, train and deploy a force capable of affecting the European battlefield. President Wilson responded by breaking diplomatic relations with Germany on February 3rd, 1917. But he didn't ask for war. Not yet. Wilson, who had just won re-election in November 1916 under the slogan "He kept us out of war," was reluctant to abandon neutrality. He hoped that breaking relations would be enough to deter Germany. It wasn't. In February and March 1917, German U-boats sank several American merchant ships: the Illinois, the City of Memphis, the Vigilancia, the Algonquin. American sailors died. Public opinion began to shift, but significant opposition to war remained. Many Americans, particularly those of German or Irish descent, opposed joining the Allies. Socialists and progressives argued that the war was a capitalist and imperialist conflict not worth American blood. Some Midwestern and Western states remained deeply isolationist. Then came the Zimmermann telegram. In January 1917, German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann sent an encrypted telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico. The message was explosive. If the United States entered the war, Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico. In exchange for Mexican support, Germany would help Mexico recover territories lost in the Mexican-American War: Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Germany also asked Mexico to persuade Japan to join the Central Powers. British naval intelligence intercepted and decrypted the telegram. On February 24, 1917, the British government presented it to President Wilson. On March 1st, American newspapers published the text. The American public was stunned and enraged. Germany was proposing to help Mexico invade the American Southwest. The telegram shifted public opinion dramatically. Suddenly, Germany seemed not just a distant European problem, but a direct threat to American territory. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson appeared before a special joint session of Congress. In a solemn address, he asked for a declaration of war against Germany. The world must be made safe for democracy, he declared. The Senate voted on April 4th, 82 in favour, 6 against. The House voted on April 6th, 373 in favour, 50 against. The United States was at war. But what if it hadn't been? What if at that crucial moment the decision had gone differently? Let's establish our divergence point clearly. In our alternate timeline, President Wilson does not ask Congress for a declaration of war. Perhaps the Zimmermann telegram is never intercepted, or its authenticity is successfully denied by Germany. Perhaps Wilson suffers a stroke or heart attack, and his successor is more committed to neutrality. Or perhaps the anti-war forces in Congress, led by senators like Robert La Follette and George Norris, managed to filibuster and block any declaration of war. The specific mechanism matters less than the result. As spring turns to summer in 1917, the United States remains neutral. American loans to the Allies continue, but no American soldiers board ships for France. No American factories convert entirely to war production. No American expeditionary force forms under General John J. Pershing. The immediate reaction in Europe would have been mixed. In Germany, there would be relief and celebration. The gamble of unrestricted submarine warfare had paid off. America remained on the sidelines. Now Germany could focus all its energy on defeating France and Britain before the nation collapsed from blockade and starvation. The Kaiser and his generals, believing they had only months to achieve victory, would have pressed forward with their plans for a massive spring offensive in 1918. In Britain and France, the American decision would have caused near despair. Allied leaders had been counting on American intervention to tip the balance. The British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had told his war cabinet that America's entry was essential to victory. French Premier Georges Clemenceau had privately admitted that without American help, France might have to seek a negotiated peace. Now those hopes evaporated. The Allies would have to win on their own, or they would have to make peace with Germany, a peace that would undoubtedly favour the Central Powers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand how this alternate history unfolds, we need to examine what the Allies were facing in 1917 and early 1918, and how the war might have progressed without American intervention. In our timeline, American forces began arriving in France in significant numbers in the summer of 1918. By July 1918, American troops were landing at a rate of 10,000 per day. These fresh, enthusiastic soldiers provided a crucial morale boost to the exhausted French and British armies. More importantly, they provided manpower. During the German spring offensives of 1918, American divisions helped plug gaps in the Allied lines. At battles like Belleau Wood, Château-Thierry, and the Second Battle of the Marne, American Marines and soldiers fought with a ferocity that impressed and inspired the French. Without these American reinforcements, the situation on the Western Front in 1918 looks very different. Let's trace this alternate timeline month by month. In March 1917, the United States declares it will remain neutral. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare continues unchecked. British shipping losses mount alarmingly. In April 1917 alone, U-boats sink 881,000 tons of shipping. This is close to the total that would have forced Britain to consider surrender. But the British Admiralty finally implements a convoy system, grouping merchant ships together under naval escort. This reduces losses significantly, though not to levels that prevent serious supply shortages. Russia's situation continues to deteriorate. The March Revolution replaces the Tsar with a provisional government that tries to continue the war. But Russia's armies are demoralized, undersupplied, and increasingly influenced by Bolshevik propaganda calling for immediate peace. In November 1917, Lenin's Bolsheviks seized power in the October Revolution. One of their first acts is to sue for peace. Negotiations begin at Brest-Litovsk in December 1917. For the Allies, Russia's collapse is catastrophic. For 3 years, Russia had tied down huge numbers of German and Austrian troops on the Eastern Front. Now those forces would be freed for deployment to the West. Germany quickly negotiates the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, imposing harsh terms on Lenin's Soviet government. Russia surrenders Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic states, Finland, and territory in the Caucasus. It's a brutal peace, but it gives Germany what it needs: freedom to concentrate everything on the Western Front. In our timeline, Germany transferred about 50 divisions from east to west after Brest-Litovsk. This gave Germany temporary numerical superiority on the Western Front for the first time since 1914. General Ludendorff planned a series of massive offensives, collectively called the Kaiserschlacht or Kaiser's Battle, designed to break the Allied lines before American forces could arrive in decisive numbers. In our alternate timeline, with no American arrival expected at all, Germany's strategic calculation changes. Ludendorff knows he still faces a time limit. The British blockade continues to starve Germany, and the nation cannot sustain the war effort indefinitely. But without the looming threat of millions of Americans, he can be more patient, more methodical. He might plan fewer, more concentrated offensives rather than the desperate series of attacks he launched in our timeline. The first German offensive, Operation Michael, would still launch in March 1918. This was the largest German attack of the war. On March 21st, 1918, at 4:40 a.m., more than 6,600 German artillery pieces opened fire along a 50-mile front held by the British 5th and 3rd Armies. For 5 hours, they fired over 3.5 million shells, a bombardment of unprecedented intensity. Then 74 German divisions, many composed of specially trained stormtroopers, attacked. The British lines shattered. Using innovative infiltration tactics, bypassing strong points and driving deep into the British rear, German forces advanced up to 40 miles in some sectors, the deepest advance on the Western Front since 1914. British casualties exceeded 177,000 men, including 21,000 captured on the first day alone. The Germans captured 1,100 square miles of territory and came within striking distance of the crucial railway junction at Amiens. In our timeline, French reinforcements rushed north, and arriving American divisions helped stabilize the situation. The German advance was halted at Villers-Bretonneux, just east of Amiens, in early April. The operation was a tactical success but an operational failure. Germany had gained ground but hadn't achieved the breakthrough that would split the Allied armies or capture vital objectives. And Germany had suffered 239,000 casualties, including many irreplaceable stormtroopers. In our alternate timeline, without American forces, the situation is more dire for the Allies. French reserves exist but are limited. The French army, still recovering from the mutinies of 1917, is fragile. British reserves are depleted. General Haig, the British commander, issues his famous backs to the wall order. There is no other course open to us but to fight it out. Every position must be held to the last man. There must be no retirement. With our backs to the wall, and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. But courage alone cannot hold ground indefinitely against superior numbers. Let's imagine that in this timeline the Germans actually capture Amiens in early April 1918. This would be catastrophic for the Allies. Amiens was the hinge of the British and French armies, the railway junction through which supplies and reinforcements flowed. Its loss would effectively split the Allied forces, with the British pushed back toward the Channel ports and the French falling back toward Paris. This leads directly to Ludendorff's next offensive, Operation Georgette, launched on April 9, 1918 in Flanders. This attack targeted British positions near the Lys River, aiming to capture Hazebrouck and its vital railway connections. In our timeline, this attack made significant gains but ultimately failed to break through. In our alternate timeline, and with the British already reeling from the loss of Amiens, and with no American reinforcements arriving, Operation Georgette achieves its objectives. British forces are pushed back and the Germans capture Hazebrouck. By late April 1918, in this alternate timeline, the situation for the Allies is critical. The British Expeditionary Force has been mauled and pushed back toward the Channel coast. The French army is dangerously extended, trying to hold both the line opposite Paris and support the retreating British. German forces, despite significant casualties, have achieved the operational breakthrough that eluded them in our timeline. Now Ludendorff faces a choice. Does he continue pressing the British, potentially driving them into the sea at Dunkirk? Or does he pivot south and drive on Paris, seeking to knock France out of the war? In our timeline, he did neither effectively, instead launching a series of attacks that gained ground but exhausted his army without decisive results. In this alternate timeline, with no American army to worry about, he can afford to be more focused. Let's say he chooses Paris. A massive German offensive launched in May 1918, using forces freed from the now secure northern sector, drives toward the French capital. The French fight desperately, but they are exhausted, demoralized, and outnumbered. By June 1918, German forces are shelling Paris from close range, just as they did briefly in our timeline in the spring of 1918, but now with far greater strength and persistence. The French government, faced with the imminent fall of Paris and the collapse of the army, makes the agonizing decision that has been whispered about for months. They open negotiations for an armistice. Britain, with its army battered and pushed back to the Channel, no longer has the forces to continue the fight alone. The Dominion forces from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa have fought with incredible bravery, but they cannot replace the losses. The British government too agrees to negotiate. By the summer of 1918, the war in the West sputters to a halt as diplomats gather to discuss terms. The question is no longer whether the Allies will win, but what kind of peace Germany will impose. In our timeline, Germany was defeated militarily and then faced the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, dictated by the victorious Allies. In this alternate timeline, the tables are turned. Germany, having achieved a military victory in the West, is in a position to dictate terms to France and Britain. But what would those terms look like? We have a template, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed between Germany and Soviet Russia in March 1918. That treaty was harsh, stripping Russia of vast territories and resources. But the Western peace wouldn't necessarily be as punitive. Germany's war aims in the West were less about territorial annexation and more about security and economic dominance. The peace conference, let's imagine it convenes in Brussels in August 1918, a symbolic choice as Belgium has been under German occupation since 1914. The German delegation is led by Chancellor Georg von Hertling and representatives of the German General Staff. The Allied delegations arrived defeated and desperate to end the bloodshed. For Belgium, the terms would be humiliating but not devastating. Germany would not annex Belgium outright, as this had been one of the causes of British entry into the war, and Germany doesn't want to provoke future conflict. Instead, Belgium becomes a German client state, essentially a protectorate. German troops withdraw, but Belgium must accept German economic advisors and trade preferences. The fortress city of Liège remains demilitarized under international, meaning German, supervision. For France, the terms are harsher. Germany demands the return of Alsace-Lorraine. No, Alsace-Lorraine was already German, seized from France in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. What Germany demands is additional territory. The iron ore fields of Briey and Longwy in northeastern France, vital for steel production, are annexed to Germany. Additionally, France must cede a strip of territory along the Belgian border, creating a buffer zone controlled by Germany. The French fortress system facing Germany must be dismantled and demilitarized. Economically, France faces very harsh terms. Reparations are required, not at the astronomical levels imposed on Germany in our timeline, but still significant. France must pay for the costs of German occupation and reconstruction in Belgium and northeastern France. French coal mines are obliged to supply Germany with coal at favourable rates for a period of 30 years. Perhaps most significantly, France must accept trade agreements that favour German industrial products, effectively giving Germany a strong advantage in French markets. Militarily, France's army is limited to 200,000 men, barely enough for internal security. Conscription is forbidden. France cannot maintain tanks or military aircraft, and its navy is reduced to a coastal defence force. The French General Staff is dissolved, and French military facilities must be open to German inspection. For Britain, the terms are focused on naval and colonial matters. Germany does not demand British territory in Europe. Britain has none to give, but Germany does demand colonies. German East Africa, Southwest Africa and Pacific colonies seized by Allied forces during the war are returned. Additionally, Britain must cede some of its colonies to Germany. Perhaps Tanganyika, formerly German East Africa, is not only returned but expanded with neighbouring British territory. German New Guinea and other Pacific islands return to German control. Most significantly, Britain must accept German naval parity. The massive German High Seas Fleet, interned during armistice talks, is released. Germany is permitted to build new battleships and submarines to match British numbers. This shatters Britain's long-held policy of maintaining a two-power standard, a navy larger than the next two powers combined. Economically, Britain escapes relatively lightly compared to France. The British Isles were not occupied, and Britain's industrial base remains intact. But Britain must grant Germany most favoured nation trading status and reduce tariffs on German goods. Additionally, Britain must repay loans made by American banks during the war, loans that in our timeline were largely forgiven or reduced. Without American entry into the war, there's no political reason for the United States to be generous. What about the United States in all this? America is not at the peace table, having remained neutral, but American banks have loaned billions of dollars to the Allies, and now those allies have lost. In our timeline, Allied victory meant those loans were eventually repaid through reparations extracted from Germany. In this alternate timeline, France and Britain, impoverished by defeat and reparations to Germany, cannot fully repay their American creditors. The result is a financial crisis that ripples through American banking and contributes to economic instability in the 1920s. The peace treaty, let's call it the Treaty of Brussels, is signed in September 1918. It is not as punitive as Versailles in our timeline, but it reshapes Europe fundamentally. Germany is now the dominant power on the continent, its borders expanded, its military intact, its industry supreme. France is reduced to a second-rate power, bitter and defeated. Britain remains a global empire but has lost its naval supremacy and much of its prestige. The balance of power that existed before 1914 is shattered, replaced by German hegemony. But history doesn't end with peace treaties. The Treaty of Brussels, like Versailles, sows seeds that will bear unexpected fruit. Let's explore the world that emerges from this German victory. This immediate post-war period, 1918 to 1920, would be chaotic across Europe, but in ways quite different from our timeline. In Germany, there is no collapse, no revolution, no stab-in-the-back myth. The German army returns victorious. The Kaiser, Wilhelm II, remains on his throne, his prestige enhanced by victory. The German generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff are national heroes, having delivered the victory that eluded Germany in our timeline. This means the Weimar Republic never emerges. Instead, the German Empire continues, though it must adapt. The war has still exhausted Germany. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers are dead or maimed. Civilians have suffered years of privation. Returning soldiers expect rewards for their sacrifice. The working class, influenced by socialist ideas and by the Russian Revolution, demands political reforms and better conditions. The Kaiser and his advisors, understanding that some change is necessary, implement limited reforms. The Prussian three-class voting system, which had given disproportionate power to the wealthy, is abolished. Universal male suffrage is extended. The Reichstag, Germany's parliament, gains more power relative to the Kaiser, though Germany remains a constitutional monarchy, not a democracy. Social welfare programs are expanded to care for veterans and war widows. These reforms bleed off revolutionary pressure while maintaining the essential structure of the German Empire. In France, the situation is far more volatile. The nation has been defeated after 4 years of total war. Over 1.3 million French soldiers are dead and millions more are wounded. Northeastern France, occupied by Germany for most of the war, is devastated. Now France must pay reparations to Germany and accept a position of subordination. The Third Republic, which governed France since 1870, collapses under the weight of defeat and humiliation. What replaces it? Several possibilities emerge. One is a right-wing authoritarian regime, similar to what Vichy France became in our timeline during World War II. Military officers and conservatives, blaming the defeat on politicians and socialists, seize power. They promise to restore French glory, but in reality they can only collaborate with German dominance while building up strength for a future confrontation. Anti-German resentment simmers, kept in check by German military might and economic leverage. Another possibility is a left-wing revolution. French socialists and communists, inspired by the Russian Revolution and enraged by the suffering and defeat, attempt to overthrow the existing order. Street battles erupt in Paris and other cities. For a time, France teeters on the brink of civil war between communist revolutionaries and conservative forces. Germany, fearing the spread of Bolshevism, might even intervene militarily to support the French right, further humiliating France but preventing a communist takeover. Ultimately, France likely settles into an uneasy authoritarian regime, neither fully communist nor fully democratic, focused on internal reconstruction and resentful subordination to Germany. The Franco-German rivalry that defined much of the 19th and early 20th centuries continues, but now with Germany firmly in the dominant position. In Britain, the situation is complex. Britain has not been invaded or occupied, but it has been defeated. The myth of British invincibility, already damaged by the Boer War, is shattered. The Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, having sent hundreds of thousands of men to fight and die in a losing cause, begin to question their ties to the mother country. The process of decolonisation, which in our timeline took decades after World War II, might accelerate. Why should Australians die for British wars when Britain cannot even win those wars? Economically, Britain faces severe challenges. The cost of the war was enormous, and now Britain must also accept German naval parity and colonial adjustments. British industry, which dominated the 19th century, faces stiff competition from a triumphant Germany. The British pound, once the world's reserve currency, is weakened. American financial institutions owed vast sums by Britain become increasingly influential over British economic policy. Politically, Britain might turn inward. The Liberal Party, which governed during the war under Lloyd George and Herbert Asquith, is discredited by defeat. The Conservative Party, traditionally more sceptical of continental entanglements, gains strength. There's even a possibility of a British-American rapprochement, with Britain recognising that its future lies not in competing with Germany in Europe, but in strengthening ties with the United States and focusing on the empire. The smaller nations of Europe face their own adjustments. Belgium, under German protection, loses its sovereignty in all but name. Poland, which in our timeline regained independence in 1918 after more than a century of partition, remains divided. Western Poland, occupied by Germany during the war, is incorporated into Germany as the General Government of Poland, a colonial territory. Eastern Poland remains part of Soviet Russia's sphere under the terms of Brest-Litovsk, though the Bolsheviks have little control there. Central Poland becomes a nominally independent Polish state, but in reality, it's a German puppet. Its economy tied to Germany, its foreign policy dictated from Berlin. Czechoslovakia, which in our timeline emerged in 1918 from the ruins of Austria-Hungary, doesn't exist in this alternate timeline. Austria-Hungary, though exhausted and strained, has won the war alongside Germany. The empire undertakes reforms, granting more autonomy to its various ethnic groups in an attempt to hold together. The Czechs gain more rights within the empire, but they remain subjects of the Habsburg crown. The Slovaks, previously part of Hungary, remain so, though with some concessions to their linguistic and cultural identity. The Balkans remain a powder keg. Serbia, which started the war by sheltering the assassins of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is harshly treated. Austrian and Bulgarian forces have occupied Serbia. The Treaty of Brussels might partition Serbia, with territory going to Bulgaria and Austria-Hungary, while a rump Serbian state survives as a client of the Central Powers. Romania, which joined the Allies in 1916 and was quickly defeated, is forced to cede territory and resources. The Romanian oil fields at Ploiești come under German economic control, providing Germany with a crucial energy source. Greece, which joined the Allies late in the war, faces territorial losses. Bulgaria regains territory lost in the Second Balkan War and might even expand into Greek Macedonia. The Greek government, humiliated by defeat, faces internal instability and possible regime change. The most significant new dynamic in Europe is the relationship between Germany and Soviet Russia. In our timeline, these powers were bitter enemies, leading to World War II. In this alternate timeline, the relationship is more complex. Germany has imposed a harsh peace at Brest-Litovsk, stripping Russia of vast territories. But both powers face common enemies, the Western democracies. Germany wants to maintain its continental hegemony. Soviet Russia, isolated and facing civil war, needs economic partners and wants to avoid hostile encirclement. A strange partnership might emerge. German technical expertise helps Soviet industrialization. Soviet raw materials, grain from Ukraine when Germany controls it or trades for it, oil from the Caucasus, flow to Germany, helping circumvent any remaining British blockade efforts. This partnership is based on mutual benefit, not ideology. German conservatives despise Bolshevism, and Soviet leaders hate German imperialism. But both recognize that cooperation serves their interests against the Western powers. This German-Soviet relationship would be one of the defining features of interwar Europe in this timeline. It prevents the kind of isolation that plagued both countries in our timeline. Germany, having won the war, doesn't face the international ostracism that followed Versailles. Soviet Russia, while still revolutionary and threatening to the capitalist order, has a major trading partner in Germany, reducing its desperation and possibly its aggressive export of revolution. One of the most significant differences in this alternate timeline is what doesn't happen: the Treaty of Versailles and its consequences. In our timeline, the Treaty of Versailles, imposed on Germany in 1919, was one of the most consequential documents of the 20th century. It redrew borders, assigned war guilt solely to Germany and its allies, demanded crushing reparations, limited Germany's military, and created the League of Nations. The treaty was controversial from the start. John Maynard Keynes, the British economist who attended the peace conference, resigned in protest and wrote "The Economic Consequences of the Peace," arguing that the reparations would destroy Germany's economy and destabilize all of Europe. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, on the other hand, believed the treaty was too lenient, famously declaring, "This is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. He was almost exactly right. 20 years and 65 days after Versailles was signed, Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. The Treaty of Versailles created conditions that allowed extremist political movements to gain support in Germany. The so-called stab-in-the-back myth, the belief that the country had been betrayed by politicians who surrendered despite the army remaining undefeated, became a central element in national rhetoric. The economic burden of reparations contributed to the hyperinflation of 1923 and left Germany particularly vulnerable to the effects of the Great Depression. The combination of lost territory, military restrictions, and national humiliation fostered widespread resentment and a desire to restore the nation's standing in Europe. In our alternate timeline, none of this happens to Germany. There is no Treaty of Versailles punishing Germany. There is no war guilt clause. There is no massive reparation debt crushing the German economy. The German military is not restricted. Germany's borders are not reduced, they're expanded. There is no stab-in-the-back myth, because the German army actually won. This means the specific conditions that allowed extremist movements to rise to power no longer exist. A former soldier and aspiring artist, who in our timeline became a prominent political figure, instead returns to victorious Germany after the war. In the historical timeline, he remained in the army and eventually joined a nationalist political group, which he later transformed into a far-right party. His appeal was based on promises to restore the nation's standing, challenge the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and address the widespread sense of national humiliation. In this alternate timeline, there is no national humiliation to avenge. Germany is already strong and prosperous. The economy, though impacted by the war, is not devastated by reparations or hyperinflation. Without a divisive political message to rally around, extremist figures remain relatively obscure. They may continue to express nationalist ideas in local venues, but they never gain significant national influence. Movements that might have become prominent in our timeline remain marginal and on the fringes of political life. This raises an important question. Without the rise of far-right extremism in Germany, would a second global conflict still occur? The answer is complex and requires a careful examination of the other political, economic, and social factors that contributed to war. The global economy of the 1920s would look dramatically different in this alternate timeline. In our timeline, the period from 1918 to 1929 saw tremendous economic volatility. The immediate post-war period brought a short recession as economies demobilized. Then came the Roaring Twenties in the United States, a period of prosperity, speculation, and cultural flowering. In Europe, the story was more mixed. Germany suffered hyperinflation in 1923, rendering the German mark worthless and wiping out the savings of the middle class. Britain struggled with unemployment and industrial stagnation. France faced inflation and political instability. The Soviet Union, under the new economic policy, began recovering from civil war but remained economically backward. In our alternate timeline, the economic dynamics shift significantly. Germany, victorious and dominant in Europe, experiences a post-war boom. German industry, not hampered by reparations or restrictions, expands rapidly. The territories gained or controlled by Germany provide markets and resources. German corporations expand into Central and Eastern Europe. establishing trade networks and industrial partnerships. The German mark, backed by a victorious economy and resources from occupied or client territories, becomes one of the world's strongest currencies alongside the British pound and American dollar. However, this German boom has consequences. French and British industries struggle to compete with German products, especially in European markets. The economic subordination written into the Treaty of Brussels becomes a reality as German goods flood into France and other European countries. British manufacturers, already facing challenges from American competition, now face German competition as well. The United States economy also follows a different path. In our timeline, America emerged from World War I as a major creditor nation. The loans made to the Allies were eventually repaid, at least partially, through a complex scheme of German reparations flowing to France and Britain, which then paid their debts to America. In this alternate timeline, France and Britain cannot fully repay their American loans. American banks and investors lose billions of dollars. This contributes to a banking crisis in the early 1920s, more severe than the recession that occurred in our timeline. The Federal Reserve, still a relatively new institution, created only in 1913, struggles to manage this crisis. Some banks fail, unemployment rises, there's political pressure on the government to recover the lost loans, but how? America cannot force Britain or France to pay. President Warren G. Harding and his successor Calvin Coolidge pursue a policy of isolationism and economic nationalism. Tariffs are raised to protect American industry from foreign competition. Immigration is restricted more severely than in our timeline. This American turn inward has global effects. In our timeline, American investment in Europe, particularly Germany through the Dawes Plan of 1924 and the Young Plan of 1929, helped stabilize the European economy. In this alternate timeline, American capital is more cautious about European investments. Why invest in France, a defeated power with limited growth prospects? Why invest in Germany, a dominant power that doesn't need American money? Instead, American investment might focus more on Latin America and Asia. American corporations expand in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, seeking raw materials and markets. This accelerates American economic dominance in the Western Hemisphere. United States influence in Cuba, Panama, Nicaragua, and other countries increases. This might sow seeds of anti-American resentment and nationalist movements in these regions earlier than in our timeline. The 1920s also see the emergence of new technologies and industries: automobiles, radio, aviation, chemicals, and electrical products. In our timeline, America led in many of these industries. In this alternate timeline, Germany is a much stronger competitor. German chemical companies like BASF and Bayer, not hampered by patent seizures and restrictions as they were after Versailles, become global leaders. German aviation companies, not limited by treaty restrictions, develop advanced aircraft. The competition between American and German industry becomes one of the defining features of the global economy. This brings us to a critical moment: the Great Depression. In our timeline, the stock market crash of October 1929 triggered a global economic catastrophe that lasted through the 1930s. The causes were complex: overproduction, speculation, banking failures, the gold standard, and international trade imbalances. In this alternate timeline, many of these factors still exist, but the specific dynamics are different. The crash might still happen, though possibly at a different time or triggered by different factors. Let's say that in this timeline the crash comes in 1930 or 1931, triggered by banking failures stemming from bad European loans and over-speculation in American markets. The result is similar. Unemployment soars, businesses fail, international trade collapses. But the political responses differ significantly. In the United States, the response might be more nationalist and isolationist. President Herbert Hoover or his successor faces immense pressure to protect American workers and industries. The Smoot-Hawley tariff, which in our timeline raised tariffs to historic highs and worsened the Depression, might be even more extreme in this timeline. America pulls back further from the world economy, focusing on domestic recovery. In Germany, the economic downturn is serious but not as catastrophic as in our timeline. The economy is stronger, more diversified and less reliant on foreign loans. Unemployment rises, but not to the extreme levels seen historically. The German government, confident in its stability, implements public works programs and economic stimulus measures. These initiatives, similar in effect to policies enacted later in our timeline but without extremist ideological influence, allow Germany to recover more quickly than many other nations. In France and Britain, the Depression is devastating. These countries were already struggling, and the economic collapse pushes them further into crisis. Unemployment, poverty, and political radicalization all increase. Britain abandons the gold standard earlier than in our timeline, and the pound sterling depreciates sharply. France faces banking crises and political upheaval, as government after government fails to address the economic disaster. The global economic crisis of the 1930s in this alternate timeline creates a different set of tensions and conflicts than in our timeline. Germany, relatively strong, becomes even more dominant economically over a weakened Europe. This might breed resentment and calls for resistance, but without the military power to back it up, France and Britain can only watch as German economic influence expands further. One of the most significant variables in this alternate history is the Soviet Union. In our timeline, the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917 led to years of civil war, foreign intervention, and isolation. The Soviet Union emerged as a pariah state, ideologically committed to world revolution and threatening to the capitalist order. Under Stalin, who consolidated power by the late 1920s, the Soviet Union pursued rapid industrialization through the 5-year plans, collectivization of agriculture that caused famines killing millions, and totalitarian repression. In this alternate timeline, several factors change Soviet Russia's trajectory. First, there's no American intervention in the Russian Civil War. In our timeline, American forces, along with British, French, and Japanese troops, intervened in Russia between 1918 and 1920, supporting anti-Bolshevik white forces. This intervention was limited and ultimately unsuccessful, but it contributed to Soviet paranoia and hostility toward the West. In this alternate timeline, with America remaining neutral even in World War I, there's no American intervention in Russia. Second, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk stands as the final settlement of Germany and Russia's borders, at least initially. This treaty stripped Soviet Russia of Ukraine, the Baltic states, Poland, Finland and Caucasian territory. In our timeline, Germany's defeat in November 1918 allowed the Bolsheviks to renounce the treaty and eventually to reconquer much of this lost territory, though Poland and the Baltic states remained independent. In this alternate timeline, Germany's victory means the Brest-Litovsk borders remain largely intact. Ukraine, at least the western part, remains under German control or influence. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania become German client states. Poland is divided between Germany and Russia. Finland remains independent but within Germany's sphere of influence. This means the Soviet Union is significantly smaller and weaker than in our timeline. However, this smaller Soviet Union might also be more stable internally. The Russian Civil War still occurs, but it might be shorter and less devastating. The White Forces, without as much foreign support but also without the vast territories to defend, might collapse more quickly. The Bolsheviks, facing a smaller country with a more compact territory, can consolidate power more efficiently. The relationship between Germany and Soviet Russia becomes crucial. In our timeline, the two powers signed the Treaty of Rapallo in 1922, establishing economic and military cooperation. In this alternate timeline, such cooperation might be even more extensive. Germany needs resources, oil, grain, minerals that Russia can provide. The Soviet Union needs technology, machinery and capital that Germany can supply. A symbiotic relationship develops. This relationship has profound implications. Soviet industrialization, instead of being isolated and self-sufficient as in our timeline, receives significant German technical assistance. German engineers help build Soviet factories. German military advisors train the Red Army. In return, Soviet raw materials flow to Germany. This partnership benefits both powers economically and militarily. But what about Stalin? In our timeline, Joseph Stalin rose to power after Lenin's death in 1924, outmaneuvering rivals like Leon Trotsky. By the late 1920s, Stalin had consolidated absolute power and launched his brutal programs of collectivization and purges. Does Stalin still rise in this alternate timeline? Possibly, but his Soviet Union might be different. With German economic partnership providing resources and technology, the desperate forced industrialization of the 5-year plans might not be necessary, or at least not as extreme. Collectivization, which Stalin pursued partly to extract resources from the peasantry to fund industrialization, might be less brutal if alternative sources of capital exist through German trade. Alternatively, a different Soviet leader might emerge. Trotsky, who advocated for permanent revolution and world communist uprising, might be more appealing to a Bolshevik party that sees opportunities to expand influence in a Europe weakened by war and economic crisis. Or perhaps a more moderate leader, someone less paranoid and brutal than Stalin, consolidates power. For the purposes of this alternate history, let's assume Stalin still comes to power, as his ruthlessness and bureaucratic skill were significant factors in our timeline. But his Soviet Union, benefiting from German partnership and managing a smaller territory, is somewhat less isolated and desperate. The great purges of the 1930s might still occur, as they stemmed from Stalin's paranoia as much as external factors, but perhaps they're less extensive. The ideological conflict between Soviet communism and German monarchism remains a tension, but both powers recognize that cooperation serves their interests against the Western democracies. This strange partnership becomes one of the stabilizing factors in European politics through the 1920s and 1930s. One aspect of this alternate history we haven't fully explored is the impact on the colonial world. In our timeline, World War I was a transformative moment for colonialism. European powers mobilized colonial subjects to fight in the war. Indian soldiers fought in France and the Middle East. African troops served in East Africa and Europe. These colonial subjects, having fought for their imperial masters, increasingly demanded rights, representation, and eventually independence. The war also weakened the European colonial powers. Britain and France, exhausted by war, found it increasingly difficult to maintain control over their vast empires. The interwar period saw growing nationalist movements in India, Egypt, Indochina, and elsewhere. World War II would accelerate this process, leading to widespread decolonization in the 1940s through 1960s. In this alternate timeline, the dynamics of colonialism shift. Britain and France, having been defeated, are weakened but not nearly as exhausted as they were after World War II in our timeline. Their colonies were mobilized during World War I, but the war ended in 1918 rather than dragging on to 1945. Colonial nationalist movements still emerge, but they face imperial powers that are less weakened and perhaps more determined to hold on to their empires as sources of prestige and resources. India, the jewel of the British Empire, becomes a critical case. In our timeline, the Indian independence movement accelerated after World War I. The Amritsar massacre of 1919, where British troops fired on unarmed protesters, became a turning point. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi mobilized mass non-cooperation campaigns. By 1947, Britain granted India independence. In this alternate timeline, British rule in India might last longer. Britain, humiliated by defeat in Europe, clings more tightly to the empire as a source of power and identity. British investment in India might increase as European markets become dominated by Germany. The British Empire becomes even more economically dependent on India, making Britain less willing to grant independence. However, this creates more tension and possibly more violent resistance. Indian nationalists, seeing Britain weakened, intensify their demands. The Indian National Congress, led by Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, organises massive civil disobedience campaigns. Britain responds with repression, creating a cycle of protest and crackdown. Indian independence might come earlier than in our timeline, perhaps in the 1930s, or it might come later but through a more violent path. In the Middle East, the situation is dramatically different. In our timeline, the Ottoman Empire collapsed during World War I. Britain and France divided the Middle East between them through the Sykes-Picot Agreement, creating modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. The promises made to Arab nationalists and Zionists during the war created conflicts that persist to this day. In this alternate timeline, the Ottoman Empire survives, having been on the winning side of the war. The empire is exhausted and strained, and the Young Turks who controlled the government face internal challenges. But with German support, the empire undertakes reforms. Territories like Arabia, where British agent T.E. Lawrence stirred up Arab revolts in our timeline, remain under Ottoman control or German Ottoman influence. The modern state of Israel doesn't emerge in this timeline, at least not in the 1940s. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, where Britain promised a Jewish homeland in Palestine, might never be issued or never implemented, as Britain doesn't control Palestine. The Zionist movement, which pushed for Jewish settlement in Palestine, faces a different landscape. Without British support and without the Holocaust to galvanise international support, Jewish immigration to Palestine is limited to what the Ottoman Empire permits, which is little. This has profound implications. The Arab-Israeli conflict that has defined the Middle East for much of the 20th and early 21st centuries doesn't occur, or at least not in the same form. Palestinian Arabs remain under Ottoman rule, facing different challenges. The Jewish diaspora without a state of Israel remains dispersed, though Jewish communities continue to exist globally. In Africa, German colonial rule expands. In our timeline, Germany lost all its colonies in the Treaty of Versailles. German East Africa became British Tanganyika. German Southwest Africa became South African Southwest Africa, later Namibia. German territories in West Africa and the Pacific were divided among the victorious Allies. In this alternate timeline, Germany retains and even expands its colonial holdings. The Treaty of Brussels forces Britain to cede additional African territory to Germany. German colonial administration, often brutal and exploitative in our timeline, continues and possibly intensifies. African nationalist movements face a different colonizer, one less exhausted by global war and more confident in its power. However, this also means that the specific colonial borders and arrangements created after World War I don't exist. Countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and many African nations were created by European powers after World War I. In this alternate timeline, the map is drawn differently, which will have cascading effects on 20th and 21st century politics, conflicts, and identities. We have established that far-right extremist movements that rose to prominence in our timeline are unlikely to gain power in this alternate scenario, since the conditions that enabled them, national humiliation, economic collapse, and widespread myths of betrayal, do not exist in a victorious Germany. But does this mean that authoritarian or fascist ideologies do not emerge at all? Fascism as an ideology and political movement did not originate in Germany, or with any single individual. It first emerged in Italy under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. In our timeline, Mussolini established the Fascist Party in 1919 and rose to power with the March on Rome in 1922. Italian fascism was characterized by strong nationalism, centralized authority, militarism, and corporatist economic policies. It emphasized the primacy of the state, rejected liberal democracy and communism, and often used violence as a means of political enforcement. Italy's trajectory in this alternate timeline is complex. Italy entered World War I on the Allied side in 1915, lured by promises of territorial gains from Austria-Hungary. In our timeline, Italy fought hard but gained little, and many Italians felt cheated by the Paris peace settlement. This resentment contributed to political instability that Mussolini exploited. In this alternate timeline, Italy has lost the war alongside the other allies. Italian casualties were enormous, over 600,000 dead, and the nation gained nothing. In fact, Italy might be forced to cede territory to Austria-Hungary and pay minor reparations. The Italian government, discredited by defeat, collapses. Political chaos ensues. Into this chaos steps Benito Mussolini. His appeal is not based on avenging a peace treaty, but on restoring national pride after catastrophic defeat. He blames the parliamentary system, the socialists, and weak leadership for Italy's humiliation. His message resonates with veterans, the middle class, and nationalists. Mussolini's fascists might come to power even earlier than in our timeline, perhaps by 1920 or 1921. But Mussolini's Italy faces a different geopolitical situation. Austria-Hungary, victorious and intact, is a major power to Italy's north. Germany dominates Central Europe. Italy, isolated and defeated, cannot pursue the aggressive foreign policy that Mussolini attempted in our timeline. Instead, Italian fascism might turn inward, focusing on domestic repression, economic corporatism, and cultural nationalism without the imperial adventures in Ethiopia and Albania that characterized Mussolini's rule. Alternatively, Italy might choose to align with Germany, seeking security and partnership with the dominant power in Europe. This creates an intriguing dynamic, since in our timeline Italian fascism influenced Germany. But in this scenario, the relationship could be reversed or take a different form. German conservatism, traditional and monarchist rather than fascist, might regard Italian fascism with cautious skepticism, seeing it either as a potential ally or as a subordinate partner in European affairs. Fascist or authoritarian movements might also emerge in other countries. France, defeated and humiliated, is ripe for extremism. In our timeline, France between the wars saw the rise of various right-wing groups, the Action Française, the Croix de Feu and others, but they never seized power as France had been victorious in World War I. In this alternate timeline, France has lost. French fascism, or a similar authoritarian nationalism, might actually take power. Imagine a French government in the late 1920s or early 1930s that is militantly anti-German, authoritarian, and seeks to overturn the Treaty of Brussels by any means necessary. This French revanchism, a mirror of German revanchism in our timeline, becomes a destabilizing force. But France is weak, militarily limited by the peace treaty and economically subordinate to Germany. French fascists can rage and threaten, but they lack the power to act. Britain might develop its own fascist movement. In our timeline, the British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald Mosley, gained some following in the 1930s but remained a fringe movement. In this alternate timeline, with Britain having lost the war and facing economic decline and the potential breakup of the empire, Mosley, or someone like him, might gain more traction. British fascism, or authoritarian conservatism, could become a significant political force, though Britain's democratic traditions might resist a full takeover. In Eastern Europe, authoritarian regimes become the norm. Poland, divided between Germany and Russia, or surviving as a small client state, might develop an authoritarian government seeking to play Germany and Russia against each other. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, if it exists in some form, Romania, and the Balkan states all trend toward authoritarianism as they did in our timeline during the 1930s. The global rise of authoritarianism in the 1920s and 1930s in this alternate timeline is driven by different factors than in our timeline. It's not a response to the perceived chaos of Versailles or the threat of communism alone. It's a response to defeat, economic instability, and the collapse of the old liberal order. Democracy is seen as weak and ineffective, unable to protect nations from catastrophe. Strongman rule becomes appealing across Europe and beyond, but without the particular ideology that combined extreme nationalism with racial and ethnic hatred, would the same scale of catastrophic violence occur? This remains one of the most morally and historically significant questions in this alternate timeline. In our timeline, there was a systematic campaign of mass murder targeting millions of Jewish people, Romani communities, disabled individuals, Poles, prisoners of war, and political opponents. This atrocity occurred between 1941 and 1945 and was carried out by the ruling regime of Germany at the time and its collaborators. It remains one of the darkest chapters in human history, a crime of such scale that it fundamentally reshaped global understanding of human rights, genocide, and international law. Such a systematic atrocity was not inevitable. It required a particular combination of factors: a government committed to an extreme and exclusionary ideology, the administrative capabilities of a modern state, the disruption and cover of large-scale war, and the dehumanization of populations through propaganda and discriminatory laws. While rooted in centuries of prejudice and social biases in Europe, this ideology was taken to an unprecedented, organised and industrial level. In this alternate timeline, the extremist regime that rose in Germany in our history does not exist, and the individual who led it remains an obscure figure. The particular racial ideology that shaped state policy, based on notions of supremacy and exclusion, never takes hold in Germany. This raises a key question. Without these specific conditions, would the mass atrocities of the Holocaust occur at all? Regarding the systematic industrialized persecution and mass murder of European Jews carried out in our timeline, it does not occur in this alternate scenario. The concentration camps, the organized killing operations, and the large-scale state-directed atrocities were all tied to the specific regime and the global conflict of World War II. Without that regime and that war, such events do not take place in the same form. However, this doesn't mean anti-Semitism disappears, or that Jews face no persecution. Anti-Semitism was widespread in Europe in the early 20th century. Pogroms occurred regularly in the Russian Empire. Jews face legal discrimination in many countries. Conspiracy theories about Jewish power circulated widely. In this alternate timeline, these attitudes persist. In a victorious and confident Germany, anti-Semitism might take a very different form. Jewish citizens are not blamed for national defeat since no such defeat occurred. Many German Jews, including those who served in the army during the war and were recognized for their service, could be more fully integrated into society. While the tolerant atmosphere of the Weimar Republic is absent, so too are the genocidal policies of the extremist regime that arose in our timeline. Jewish communities might still face social prejudice and discrimination, but not state-directed persecution or extermination. In Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and Russia, anti-Semitism remains virulent. Pogroms, violent attacks on Jewish communities, continue to occur sporadically as they did before the war. Soviet policy toward Jews under Stalin was complex, anti-Semitic in many ways, but not genocidal. In this timeline, with Stalin or another Soviet leader in power, Soviet Jews face discrimination, persecution, and violence, but not systematic extermination. The absence of the Holocaust is one of the most significant moral differences in this alternate timeline. Millions of people who died in our timeline live full lives. Jewish communities in Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, and elsewhere, which were nearly wiped out in our timeline, continue to exist. The cultural, intellectual, and demographic impact is immeasurable. The descendants of those who would have perished in the Holocaust are never born in our timeline, but do exist in this alternate one. Potentially millions of people whose lives and contributions shape this different world. However, we must also consider that the absence of one specific genocide doesn't mean the world is free of such crimes. Other forms of ethnic violence, colonial massacres, and political repression continue. The Armenian genocide of 1915, carried out by the Ottoman Empire, already occurred before our point of divergence. In this timeline, with the Ottoman Empire surviving, there might be further campaigns against minority populations. Soviet collectivization, even if less extreme than in our timeline, still causes famines and deaths. Colonial violence in Africa and Asia continues under various European powers. The world of this alternate timeline is not free of atrocity. It's simply a world where one specific, unprecedented atrocity doesn't occur. The moral calculus of alternate history is always complex and troubling. We might say that this timeline avoids the Holocaust, which is an immense good. But it also sees different conflicts, different repressions, different deaths. History doesn't offer clean moral choices, only different paths with different consequences. Let's shift our focus to how technology and culture develop differently in this alternate timeline. The 20th century in our timeline was an age of incredible technological advancement. Aviation, automobiles, radio, television, computers, nuclear power, space exploration. Many of these developments were driven or accelerated by war, particularly World War II. Without American entry into World War I and the different global dynamics that follow, how does technology evolve? In the immediate post-World War I period, 1918 to 1930, technological development continues along similar lines as in our timeline. Aviation advances rapidly. German aviation firms, not restricted by treaty limitations, develop sophisticated aircraft for military and civilian use. The Junkers and Fokker companies become world leaders. Regular passenger flights between European cities begin earlier than in our timeline. In America, the aviation industry also flourishes but faces competition from German firms. The transatlantic aviation race, to be the first to fly non-stop across the Atlantic, might be won by a German pilot rather than Charles Lindbergh, who accomplished the feat in 1927 in our timeline. If Lindbergh still makes the flight, he faces German rivals, making it a more competitive achievement. Automobile technology also advances, but with different market dynamics. In our timeline, American companies, particularly Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, dominated global automobile production. European manufacturers existed but were smaller. In this alternate timeline, German automobile firms like Daimler-Benz and BMW become major global players. The competition between American and German automakers becomes intense, with each trying to outdo the other in design, performance, and mass production techniques. Radio technology, crucial for communication and entertainment, develops similarly. The 1920s see the explosion of radio broadcasting in America, Germany, Britain, and other countries. But in this timeline, German radio technology might be more advanced, and German radio broadcasts reach across Europe, spreading German language and culture. This becomes a tool of soft power for German influence. In terms of military technology, the absence of World War II means that certain developments don't occur or are delayed. In our timeline, World War II drove massive advances in aviation, radar, cryptography, rocketry, and most significantly, nuclear weapons. Without a second global war, these technologies develop differently. Nuclear fission is still discovered in the late 1930s, as this was scientific research not directly tied to war. Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, German chemists, discovered nuclear fission in 1938 in our timeline, and they would still do so in this alternate timeline. The question is whether anyone pursues building an atomic bomb without the urgency of total war. It is possible that nuclear weapons development still occurs, but at a slower pace. In our timeline, the Manhattan Project was a vast secret undertaking, driven by fears that Germany might develop the bomb first. In this alternate scenario, without an aggressive German regime, and without a world war to create that urgency, such a massive effort is less likely. While the theoretical physics of nuclear weapons is understood by scientists in the 1940s, the enormous industrial and logistical resources required to build a functioning bomb might not be mobilized without a pressing military crisis. If an atomic bomb is eventually built, it might be by Germany, which has the scientific expertise and industrial capacity, or by the United States. The first test might occur in the late 1940s or 1950s rather than 1945. The implications are profound. In our timeline, nuclear weapons became the defining strategic factor of the Cold War. In this alternate timeline, nuclear weapons might emerge into a world not at war, raising different questions about their use and proliferation. Culturally, the absence of American dominance changes global entertainment and art. In our timeline, American cinema, music, and culture became dominant globally after World War II. Hollywood films spread worldwide. American jazz, rock and roll, and later pop music shaped global tastes. American fashion, language, and consumer culture became synonymous with modernity. In this alternate timeline, with America more isolated and less globally dominant, American culture is less influential. Hollywood still exists and produces films, but German cinema, building on the innovations of Weimar-era filmmakers like Fritz Lang and F.W. Murnau, becomes a rival. German films, perhaps less experimental than in Weimar but technically sophisticated, spread across Europe and compete with American films globally. Music also develops differently. Jazz, created by African Americans and emerging in the 1920s, still exists, but its spread is more limited if America is less engaged with the world. European classical music traditions remain more influential. German composers and musicians dominate European culture. The youth culture revolutions that American rock and roll sparked in the 1950s and 1960s might not occur in the same way. Literature and intellectual life follow a different trajectory in this alternate timeline. In our history, many European intellectuals fled to America to escape persecution and the devastation of war, with figures such as Albert Einstein, Thomas Mann, and Hannah Arendt enriching American universities and cultural life. Without the pressures of extreme political regimes and global conflict, there is no mass emigration of this kind. European intellectual and cultural life remains primarily centred in countries such as Germany, Britain, and France, continuing to develop within the continent. American literature still flourishes with authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and William Faulkner. But without the influx of European intellectuals and the post-World War II American cultural confidence, American literature might be less globally dominant. European modernism, German expressionism, and French surrealism remain more central to global literary culture. The overall picture is of a world culturally more fragmented, less dominated by a single cultural superpower. Regional cultures remain stronger. European, American, and potentially Asian cultural spheres compete, rather than one hegemon dominating. For individuals living in this world, their daily cultural consumption, the films they watch, the music they hear, the books they read, would be noticeably different from our timeline. Let's turn our focus to the United States in this alternate timeline. In our history, America's 20th century was defined by global engagement. World War I made America a creditor nation and global power. World War II made it a superpower. The Cold War made it the leader of the free world. American military bases dotted the globe. American corporations dominated international markets. American culture became synonymous with modernity. In this alternate timeline, America follows a fundamentally different path. Having never entered World War I, the United States never breaks from its traditional isolationism. The policy that George Washington advocated in his farewell address of avoiding entanglement in foreign alliances remains the cornerstone of American foreign policy. The 1920s in America see continued economic growth, though not the boom that occurred in our timeline. The war industries that would have expanded don't get that stimulus. However, America also avoids the post-war recession that hit in 1920 in our timeline. The economy grows more steadily, if less spectacularly. American banks, having lost billions in bad loans to the defeated Allies, are more cautious. The banking crisis of the early 1920s in this timeline leads to reforms and consolidation, creating a more stable, if less dynamic, financial system. American foreign policy in the 1920s and 1930s is even more isolationist than in our timeline. Congress, already skeptical of international commitments, sees the Allied defeat in Europe as vindication of non-intervention. The idea that American boys should never fight European wars becomes even more entrenched. When the League of Nations is formed after the war, not by the Allies but as a neutral arbitration body sponsored by various nations, the United States doesn't join. The Senate rejects membership by an even wider margin than in our timeline. Immigration policy becomes more restrictive earlier. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the Immigration Act of 1924 already limited immigration in our timeline, but in this alternate timeline the restrictions are more severe. The fear of European radicalism, communism, fascism and authoritarianism, all breeding in a Europe dominated by Germany, leads to calls for America to seal itself off. Immigration from Europe is reduced to a trickle. America's ethnic composition develops differently, remaining more dominated by older stock Americans of British, German and Irish descent. The 1930s bring the Great Depression to America, as in our timeline. The stock market crash might occur at a different time, but the underlying economic vulnerabilities, overproduction, speculation, unequal wealth distribution, exist in this timeline as well. When the crash comes, President Herbert Hoover or his successor faces similar challenges. Unemployment soars, banks fail, farms foreclose. The political response, however, differs. Franklin Roosevelt, if he still becomes president, faces a different political landscape. In our timeline, Roosevelt gradually moved America toward international engagement, using measures like Lend-Lease to support Britain before Pearl Harbor brought direct American entry into World War II. In this alternate timeline, there's no World War II to engage with, at least not in the form we know. Roosevelt, or whoever leads America through the Depression, focuses entirely on domestic recovery. The New Deal is larger and more ambitious because there's no distraction of foreign affairs. Public works programs employ millions. Social security, labor rights, and financial regulations are implemented. America turns inward, building a welfare state and reformed capitalism at home, while largely ignoring the world beyond its borders. This American isolationism has profound effects. In our timeline, American economic and military power underwrote the post-World War II international order, the United Nations, NATO, the Bretton Woods financial system, the Marshall Plan. In this alternate timeline, none of that happens. America remains rich and powerful, but largely disengaged from global affairs. It maintains trade relationships, particularly with Latin America, but avoids political and military commitments. The impact on Latin America is significant. American influence in the Western Hemisphere, already strong in the early 20th century, becomes even more dominant. The United States expands economically and protects its interests in Latin America, without the distraction of European or Asian commitments. The Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which justified American intervention in Latin America, is applied more aggressively. American corporations, United Fruit, Standard Oil, various mining companies dominate Latin American economies. However, this dynamic also encourages the rise of resistance and nationalist sentiment. Movements emphasizing Latin American nationalism, anti-imperialism, and even revolutionary change emerge earlier and with greater intensity. Mexico, which experienced its revolution from 1910 to 1920, becomes a prominent symbol of resistance to external influence. Other nations in the region, observing American power operating without significant rivals, begin to explore regional cooperation and alliances as a means of balancing that influence. In Asia, American policy also becomes more isolationist. The open door policy in China, which sought to maintain American commercial access while avoiding political commitments, continues. But when Japan, seeking resources and markets, begins aggressive expansion in the 1930s, America's response is limited to diplomatic protests and economic sanctions, if that. There's no appetite in America for confrontation with Japan. This brings us to a crucial question. What is Japan doing in this alternate timeline? Japan's trajectory in the 20th century was profoundly shaped by World War I and its aftermath. In our timeline, Japan entered the war on the Allied side in 1914, seizing German colonies in the Pacific and expanding its influence in China. At the Paris Peace Conference, Japan was recognized as one of the Big Five powers. But Japan was also disappointed by the treaty, failing to get a racial equality clause included, and feeling slighted by the Western powers. The 1920s saw Japan pursue a relatively moderate, cooperative foreign policy known as Taisho democracy. But the Great Depression hit Japan hard. Economic crisis combined with perceived humiliation by the Western powers and a growing military influence in government led to increasing militarism in the 1930s. Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, withdrew from the League of Nations, and began a brutal war against China in 1937. This eventually led to conflict with the United States and Japan's entry into World War II. In this alternate timeline, Japan's path diverges. Having been on the losing side in World War I as an ally of Britain, Japan faces a different situation. Japanese forces seized German Pacific colonies early and swore, but with Germany victorious, those colonies are returned. Japan gains nothing from the war and suffers economically from the disruption of trade. The Japanese government faces domestic criticism for aligning with a failing coalition. The Taisho democracy period may be shorter and less influential. Military leaders argue that Japan must depend on its own capabilities rather than on uncertain foreign allies. Concepts such as a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, envisioning Japan leading a regional bloc independent of Western powers, begin to gain traction earlier than in our timeline. However, Japan faces different constraints. In our timeline, Britain and France, exhausted by World War II, couldn't maintain their Asian colonies, allowing Japan to expand. In this alternate timeline, Britain, though weakened by defeat in World War I, still controls India, Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong and other colonies. France still holds Indochina. The Netherlands controls the Dutch East Indies. These European powers, working together and potentially with German backing, present a united front that Japan can't easily overcome. Japan might instead focus on consolidating control over Korea, which it annexed in 19TA, and expanding influence in China. The Chinese Civil War between nationalists and communists still occurs in this timeline, though possibly with different dynamics. Japan might intervene more directly, seeking to establish puppet regimes in northern China, while avoiding direct conflict with the European powers. Alternatively, Japan might pursue a more defensive strategy, building up its navy and fortifying its island territories to create an impregnable defensive perimeter. This leads to an arms race in the Pacific, with Japan, America and potentially Britain all building naval forces. The question of war between Japan and the United States is complex in this timeline. In our timeline, the road to Pearl Harbor was paved by Japanese expansion in China and Southeast Asia, American economic sanctions, and ultimately a Japanese decision to strike first rather than accept American demands. In this alternate timeline, Japan might expand more cautiously, America might be less willing to confront Japan, and the trigger for war might never occur. If war does break out, it would likely be a more limited conflict. Japan versus the United States and possibly Britain, without the global nature of World War II. Such a war might end in stalemate or negotiated peace rather than the total Japanese defeat that occurred in our timeline. Let's pause and take stock of where this alternate world stands by 1940, roughly 2 decades after the divergence point. The globe looks radically different from our timeline. In Europe, Germany is the undisputed hegemon. The German Empire, now under Kaiser Wilhelm II's successor, his son Wilhelm III, dominates Central and Eastern Europe economically and politically. France, still bitter from defeat, remains a second-tier power, economically subordinate and militarily weak. Britain retains its empire but has lost naval supremacy and much of its global prestige. The balance of power that defined 19th century Europe is gone, replaced by German dominance. The German-Soviet relationship remains one of pragmatic cooperation despite ideological tensions. Trade between the two powers is extensive. German industry benefits from Soviet raw materials. The Soviet Union benefits from German technology. This partnership prevents the kind of encirclement that both powers feared in our timeline. Italy under Mussolini or a similar fascist leader is a mid-level power, allied with or subordinate to Germany. Spain, having avoided the devastating civil war that occurred in our timeline, which was partly a proxy war between German-Italian fascism and Soviet communism, remains under conservative authoritarian rule. The Balkans are a patchwork of German and Soviet client states, authoritarian regimes playing their larger neighbours against each other. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire has reformed into something resembling Turkey, but retaining more territory and influence. The modern states of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan and Israel don't exist. The Kurdish question, the Arab-Israeli conflict and many of the region's defining issues are either absent or take different forms. Oil, increasingly important for industrial economies, is controlled by a mix of Ottoman, British and German interests. In Africa, colonialism remains entrenched. German colonies have expanded. British and French colonies remain under European control. African nationalist movements exist but face powerful, confident colonial regimes not yet weakened by World War. Independence is decades away, if it comes at all in this timeline. In Asia, Japan is a major regional power but constrained by European colonialism and American naval strength. China is divided, struggling through civil war and dealing with Japanese encroachment. India remains under British rule, though nationalist movements are growing. The colonial system in Asia remains intact, though cracks are appearing. In the Americas, the United States is rich, powerful, and isolated. Focused on its own hemisphere, America dominates Latin America economically and politically. But American global influence is limited. The American century that Henry Luce proclaimed in 1941 in our timeline doesn't occur. America is a great power but not a superpower. Technologically, the world is advanced but differently. Aviation, automobiles, radio and industrial chemistry have all developed. But military technology, driven to unprecedented heights by World War II in our timeline, is less advanced. Radar is primitive. jet engines are theoretical, computing machines are mechanical calculators, and most significantly, nuclear weapons don't exist yet. Culturally, the world is more diverse, less homogenized. American culture is influential in the Americas, but not globally dominant. European cultures, particularly German, remain strong. Asian cultures maintain more traditional forms, less influenced by Western, especially American, modernity. Politically, democracy is in retreat. The failures of the 1920s and the depression of the 1930s have discredited liberal democracy in much of the world. Authoritarianism, whether monarchical as in Germany, fascist as in Italy, communist as in the Soviet Union, or military as in Japan, is ascendant. The ideological battle between democracy and totalitarianism that defined our timeline's mid-20th century takes a different form here, if it occurs at all. The most pressing question for this alternate timeline is whether a Second World War occurs. In our timeline, World War II, 1939 to 1945, was even more devastating than World War I. Over 70 million people died. Entire cities were destroyed. The Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews. Nuclear weapons were developed and used. The war reshaped the global order completely, leading to American and Soviet superpowers, the Cold War, decolonization, and the United Nations. In this alternate timeline, the conditions that triggered a Second World War simply do not exist. There is no extremist government in Germany pursuing territorial conquest or racial policies. There is no widespread national humiliation fueling revanchism, and no aggressive leader provoking appeasement from Britain and France. Consequently, key events such as the Munich Agreement, the invasion of Poland, the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, and Operation Barbarossa never occur, because the circumstances that gave rise to them are absent. But does this mean there's no major war? Not necessarily. Wars occur for many reasons: territorial disputes, competition for resources, ideological conflicts, accidents, and miscalculations. This alternate world has plenty of tensions that could explode into war. One possibility is a German-Soviet war. Despite their pragmatic cooperation, Germany and the Soviet Union remain ideologically opposed and strategically suspicious. Germany controls territories that Russia historically claimed, especially Poland and Ukraine. The Soviet Union, even under Stalin or another leader, might seek to recover these lands. A border incident, a succession crisis in a buffer state, or a miscalculation could spark conflict. Another possibility is a naval war between the United States and Japan in the Pacific. As both powers build up their fleets and compete for influence in Asia and the Pacific Islands, incidents could escalate. A Japanese attack on American interests, or an American decision to enforce an embargo on Japan, could lead to war. Such a conflict would be primarily naval and air, fought across the vast Pacific. The outcome would depend on many factors, but given America's industrial capacity, a long war would likely favour the United States. A third possibility is a European conflict sparked by French revanchism. France, never accepting its subordinate status, might build up its military covertly and launch a surprise attack to recover lost territories. This would draw in Britain, potentially Russia, and create a new European war. But France's weakness makes this scenario less likely unless France finds powerful allies. The most dangerous scenario might be a truly global conflict arising from multiple regional wars merging. A German-Soviet war in the East, a Japanese-American war in the Pacific, and European powers choosing sides could create a worldwide conflagration. But even this wouldn't necessarily resemble World War II in our timeline. The ideologies and hatreds that made World War II so total and brutal might be absent. It's also possible that no major war occurs. The memory of World War I's devastation remains fresh. All powers know that modern industrial war is hideously destructive. Mutual deterrence, diplomatic negotiations, and crisis management might keep the peace, or at least prevent conflicts from escalating to global war. By the 1940s and 1950s in this alternate timeline, the world might settle into an uneasy peace, divided into spheres of influence: German hegemony in Europe, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere, Japanese power in East Asia, and the Soviet Union as a Eurasian power. This multipolar world might be more stable than the bipolar Cold War of our timeline, or it might be a powder keg waiting for a spark. One of the most significant developments of the mid-20th century in our timeline was nuclear weapons. The atomic bomb, developed during World War II and used against Japan in August 1945, fundamentally changed international relations, military strategy, and even human consciousness. The Cold War was defined by the nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. Mutually assured destruction became the grim guarantee of peace. In this alternate timeline, nuclear weapons are still eventually developed, but the path to their creation unfolds very differently. The scientific foundations, such as nuclear fission and chain reactions, are not dependent on war, and research in these areas continues in Germany, Britain, France, and other parts of Europe throughout the 1930s and 1940s. In our timeline, many of the leading scientists who contributed to this field fled Europe to escape persecution, and later joined the Manhattan Project in the United States. In this alternate scenario, without such political turmoil, many of these scientists remain in Europe, particularly in Germany, allowing the continent to remain a central hub of nuclear research and innovation. The first nuclear reactor might be built in Germany in the early 1940s. German scientists, well funded and supported by a confident government, make progress on nuclear technology. The potential for an atomic bomb is recognized, but without the desperate urgency of World War II, the massive industrial effort required proceeds more slowly. Alternatively, the United States might develop nuclear weapons first. American physics, with scientists like Enrico Fermi, who emigrated from Italy even without the specific threats of our timeline, J. Robert Oppenheimer, and others, is strong. The US government, concerned about German technological superiority, might fund nuclear research as a defensive measure. Whenever and wherever the first atomic bomb is built, its use is likely to be very different from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In our timeline, the bomb was used against Japan to end the war without the massive casualties an invasion would have caused. In this alternate timeline, there might be no active war when the bomb is ready. The first use might be a test demonstration, possibly observed by international representatives, designed to showcase the weapon's power and deter potential adversaries. The introduction of nuclear weapons into a multipolar world without an active global war creates interesting dynamics. If Germany develops the bomb first, other powers rush to develop their own. America, Britain, the Soviet Union, and eventually perhaps France and Japan all pursue nuclear programs. By the 1950s, multiple powers have atomic weapons. This multipolar nuclear world might be more dangerous than the bipolar Cold War. With 5 or 6 nuclear powers, each with different strategic interests and red lines, the potential for miscalculation increases. On the other hand, the very multiplicity of threats might make all powers more cautious, knowing that nuclear war could come from multiple directions. Nuclear arms control becomes a pressing issue earlier than in our timeline, with no World War II providing a common enemy, and then clear Cold War divide. Nuclear-armed powers might more readily negotiate treaties limiting weapons and testing. An international atomic energy agency, something like the IAEA but with more power, might be created in the 1950s to monitor nuclear programs and prevent proliferation. The cultural and psychological impact of nuclear weapons might be less dramatic in this timeline. In our timeline, Hiroshima created an immediate, visceral understanding of nuclear horror. Films, literature, and political discourse were shaped by the mushroom cloud and radiation sickness. In this alternate timeline, if nuclear weapons are developed without being used in war, they remain more abstract threats. The peace movement and nuclear disarmament campaigns might be smaller, though concerns about nuclear war would still exist. One of the major transformations of the mid-20th century in our timeline was decolonization. The European colonial empires that had dominated much of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East since the 19th century collapsed after World War II. India gained independence from Britain in 1947. Indonesia won independence from the Netherlands in 1949. Most of Africa decolonized in the 1950s and 1960s. By 1970, the age of empires was largely over. World War II weakened the European colonial powers fatally. Britain and France, exhausted by 6 years of total war, lacked the resources and will to hold their empires by force. The United States and the Soviet Union, the new superpowers, both opposed colonialism, though for different reasons. Nationalist movements in the colonies, emboldened by the war and seeing European weakness, demanded independence. The moral authority of the colonial powers, shattered by fascism and war, couldn't sustain empire. In this alternate timeline, decolonization follows a very different path. The European powers, while weakened by World War I, are not nearly as exhausted as they were after World War II. Britain's empire, the jewel of which is India, remains intact through the 1920s and 1930s. France holds Indochina and North Africa. The Netherlands controls the Dutch East Indies. Belgium retains the Congo. Portugal keeps its African colonies. Colonial nationalist movements still emerge. The ideas of self-determination, democracy, and national sovereignty spread. Leaders like Gandhi in India, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, and Sukarno in Indonesia still call for independence, but they face colonial powers that are more confident and more capable of repression. India, the largest and most important colony, is the key case. In our timeline, Indian independence came after Britain was exhausted by World War II, and couldn't afford to hold India by force. In this alternate timeline, Britain in the 1930s and 1940s is weaker than before World War I, but still capable of ruling India. The British Raj implements some reforms, gradually increasing Indian participation in government, but maintains ultimate control. The Indian independence movement under Gandhi continues civil disobedience campaigns, but British repression might be harsher in this timeline. The Amritsar massacre might be followed by other violent crackdowns. The Indian National Congress might be banned, its leaders imprisoned. This creates a more radical independence movement, less committed to non-violence, more willing to engage in armed struggle. One possibility is an Indian revolution in the 1940s or 1950s, a violent uprising against British rule. This would be a major war, involving millions of Indian soldiers and British forces trying to maintain control. The outcome would depend on many factors, including whether the Soviet Union or other powers support the Indian revolutionaries, and whether the British public tolerates the cost of maintaining empire. Another possibility is gradual controlled decolonisation. Britain, recognising that it cannot hold India forever, negotiates a slow transfer of power, creating dominions or semi-independent states within a British Commonwealth. This process might take decades, stretching into the 1960s or 1970s, and might leave India divided differently than in our timeline. In Southeast Asia, the situation is similar. Without World War II Japanese occupation breaking European control, France retains Indochina, and the Netherlands holds the Dutch East Indies. But nationalist movements in both regions grow stronger. Vietnam might see a war of independence against France earlier than in our timeline, perhaps in the 1940s. Indonesia might experience a similar anti-Dutch revolution. In Africa, decolonisation is probably even more delayed. African nationalist movements in the 1940s and 1950s are weaker and face more entrenched colonial rule. German colonies, expanded after World War I in this timeline, remain under German control. British, French, and Portuguese Africa remains colonised. African independence might not come until the 1970s, 1980s, or even later, and might be more violent when it does occur. The delayed decolonisation has profound effects. The global order of the late 20th century in our timeline, with dozens of newly independent nations in Africa and Asia, doesn't emerge in the same way. The United Nations, if it exists in this timeline, has a very different membership. Former colonies remain under European control or become semi-independent states with neo-colonial relationships to their former masters. This creates different fault lines in global politics. Anti-colonial liberation movements, some supported by the Soviet Union, others by nationalist governments like China, wage guerrilla wars against colonial powers. The Global South, as a political bloc, emerges differently, or not at all. The modern world's racial and economic inequalities take different forms, though they don't disappear. In our timeline, the Cold War dominated the second half of the 20th century. From roughly 1947 to 1991, the United States and the Soviet Union, along with their respective allies, engaged in a global ideological, economic and military competition that shaped nearly every aspect of international relations. The Cold War was a conflict between capitalism and communism, democracy and totalitarianism, the the West and the East. It involved proxy wars, espionage, arms races, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The Cold War in our timeline arose directly from the aftermath of the Second World War. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against Germany, became rivals as they established spheres of influence across Europe and Asia. American power, strengthened by wartime production and the fact that its homeland remained largely untouched, sought to build a liberal, international order centered on open markets and democratic governance. Meanwhile, Soviet power, having endured immense human and material losses during the conflict, pursued security through dominance in Eastern Europe and the promotion of communist ideology. In this alternate timeline, the conditions that created the Cold War don't exist. There's no World War II alliance between America and the Soviet Union that then breaks down. The United States hasn't emerged as a global superpower with military bases worldwide and a commitment to containing communism. The Soviet Union, while a major power, is smaller and engaged with Germany in pragmatic economic partnership, rather than confronting a hostile Western alliance. Does this mean there's no ideological conflict between capitalism and communism? Not exactly. The Soviet Union, whether under Stalin or another leader, remains committed to communist ideology and the eventual worldwide triumph of socialism. The United States, though isolationist, remains a capitalist democracy. These ideological differences create tensions. In this alternate timeline, the global rivalry takes a very different form. Without a divided Europe, and with Germany and the Soviet Union maintaining cooperative economic ties, there is no Iron Curtain, no Berlin Wall, and no Soviet control over Eastern Europe opposed by an American-led alliance. Instead, ideological competition unfolds in subtler ways, through influence in developing regions, differing economic models, and cultural propaganda. The tension remains, but it lacks the direct militarized confrontation and existential fear that defined the Cold War in our timeline. The Soviet Union, not isolated and besieged as in our timeline, might develop differently. Economic cooperation with Germany provides technology and capital. The desperate militarization of the Soviet economy might not occur to the same degree. The Soviet Union might pursue a less aggressive foreign policy, focusing on consolidating its power in Central Asia and Siberia, rather than confronting the West. Alternatively, the Soviet Union might become more aggressive, believing that the correlation of forces favors communism. With Europe dominated by a conservative German empire and America disengaged, the Soviet Union might support revolutionary movements worldwide more actively, seeking to spread communism to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The most likely scenario is a world with multiple centers of power and multiple competing ideologies, rather than the bipolar world of our timeline. Germany represents conservative monarchism and economic corporatism. The Soviet Union represents communism. The United States represents liberal capitalism and democracy, though largely confined to the Western Hemisphere. Britain, France, and other European states represent various forms of social democracy or authoritarianism. Japan and China pursue their own paths. This multipolar world is arguably more stable than the Cold War in some ways. No single rivalry dominates all others. Regional conflicts don't automatically become global crises, but it's also potentially more chaotic, with multiple powers pursuing different and sometimes conflicting goals without clear rules or alliance structures. The space race, such an iconic part of the Cold War, might not occur in this timeline or might take a different form. Without the desperate Soviet-American competition for prestige and technological superiority, space exploration might proceed more slowly, as a scientific endeavour rather than a propaganda tool. Or multiple powers, Germany, America, the Soviet Union, Britain, might compete in a more fragmented space race. The proxy wars that characterized the Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and many others, don't occur in the same form. But there are still conflicts, wars of decolonization, regional disputes, ideological civil wars. The difference is that they don't fit into a neat binary of capitalism versus communism, West versus East. Instead, they're more complex, with shifting alliances and multiple external powers intervening for different reasons. As we bring this alternate history into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the divergence from our timeline becomes so vast that specific predictions become speculative. But we can sketch the broad outlines of how this different world might look. Politically, the world remains multipolar. Germany, or perhaps by now a confederation of German-led European states, remains a dominant power. The Soviet Union evolved into some form of authoritarian state, whether still communist or post-communist, controls Eurasia. The United States dominates the Americas. Japan or China leads East Asia. The Middle East, Africa, and South Asia are regions of continuing conflict and competition between these great powers. Democracy is less widespread than in our timeline. Without American global leadership promoting democratic values and institutions, without the demonstration effect of the Allies' victory over fascism in World War II, and without the Cold War framing democracy as freedom against totalitarianism, democratic governance remains limited to North America, parts of Western Europe, and perhaps a few other scattered states. Economically, globalization occurs but differently. Without American-led institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, international trade is more fragmented, organized through regional blocs and bilateral agreements. The German-led European economy, the Soviet Eurasian economy, the American Hemisphere economy, and the East Asian economy are somewhat separate spheres. Technological development continues, but possibly at a slower pace in some areas. Without the massive state-sponsored research driven by World War II and the Cold War, technologies like computers, the internet, satellites, and biotech might develop more slowly. Or they might develop differently, with German, Japanese, or Soviet innovations competing with American technology, rather than American Silicon Valley dominating. Culturally, the world is more diverse. There's no global monoculture dominated by American entertainment, English language, and consumer capitalism. Regional cultures are stronger. European high culture retains more prestige. Asian cultures develop with less Western influence. Global communication is less seamless. People in different parts of the world live in more distinctly different cultural worlds. In terms of global challenges, climate change, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, and pandemics still exist. but the international cooperation needed to address them is harder to achieve in a multipolar world without shared institutions and trust. Climate change might be acknowledged later and addressed more slowly. Nuclear proliferation might be more widespread, with more states seeking the prestige and security of nuclear weapons. Terrorism takes different forms, perhaps more nationalist or anarchist than the religiously motivated terrorism of our timeline. The human experience in this alternate world varies by region, but generally involves less mobility, both physical and social, than in our timeline's globalized world. People are more rooted in their local and national communities. International travel is less common. Career opportunities are more constrained by geography. But there's also potentially more cultural continuity, less disruption of traditional ways of life, and stronger community bonds. As we reach the end of this exploration, it's worth reflecting on what this alternate history teaches us about our own world. The decision of the United States to enter World War I in 1917, which seemed at the time like a response to specific provocations, U-boats, and the Zimmermann telegram, turned out to be one of the most consequential decisions in history. It determined the outcome of World War I, which shaped the conditions that led to World War II, which created the post-war order we still live in today. If the United States had chosen not to join the Allied powers, the entire course of the 20th century would have been profoundly different. Germany might have won the First World War, or at least secured a more favourable peace settlement. Without such an outcome as the Treaty of Versailles, the political and economic turmoil that followed would likely have taken another path. The extremist regime that later rose in Germany would not have emerged, the Holocaust would not have occurred, and if a second global conflict did take place, it would have looked entirely different. The United States, in turn, might never have risen to global superpower status, and the Cold War might never have divided the world into opposing spheres of influence. Whether this alternate world would be better or worse than our timeline is impossible to say definitively. Millions of people who died in our timeline's wars would live. The specific horrors of Nazism, the Holocaust, the atomic bombings and many Cold War conflicts wouldn't occur. But other horrors, other conflicts, other tragedies would take their place. Authoritarianism might be more entrenched. Democracy might be weaker. Technological and economic progress might be slower. What's clear is that the world would be unrecognizably different. The America-centric globalization we know, the spread of democracy, the dominance of American culture, the United Nations and international institutions, all of that stems from decisions made in 1917 and the wars that followed. Remove America from World War I, and you remove the foundation of the modern world order. This alternate history also reminds us of the contingency of history. The world we live in isn't inevitable. It's the product of countless decisions, accidents, and unintended consequences. A different choice. In 1917, by President Wilson, by Congress, or by the German government regarding submarine warfare, could have sent history down an entirely different path. As we sit here in our timeline, shaped by American victory in 2 world wars, by the Cold War, by the particular technologies and culture that emerged from that history, it's humbling to consider how easily it all might have been different. The comfortable assumptions we make about progress, about the arc of history, about the inevitability of democracy and freedom, all of that depends on specific historical circumstances that could have gone another way. So the next time you think about history as a predetermined march toward the present, remember that in the spring of 1917, the United States stood at a crossroads. One path led to the world we know. The other path led somewhere else entirely, a world that might have been, a world we can imagine but never truly know. And with that thought, we've reached the end of tonight's journey through what might have been. If you enjoyed this exploration, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think of this alternate timeline. Would you want to live in that world, or are you glad we're in this one? What other historical turning points should we explore? Until next time, sleep well, and remember, history is not destiny. It's a story we tell about choices made and roads not taken. And sometimes the most fascinating stories are about the roads we didn't travel.